Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Xoogler community meetup where we get to hear from some very experienced fractional executives. It's been wonderful to meet these three Xooglers who've given back to the community over the years. And when I was thinking about how can we continue to prepare Xooglers for 2025, I thought, let's actually put this panel on fractional work for people who have been fractional folks, people who are thinking about fractional work, and really demystify what fractional really means, as it's a very the new trend over the past couple of years that's come out, but no one really can zero in on what is fractional, what's consulting, what's not. And so let's have a conversation with three Xooglers, and everyone can also raise their hand or type in their questions in the chat. And we'll be happy to make sure the second half of this conversation is open to all your questions. And why don't we get things started by introductions by our panelists. Anna, joining from Sydney, Australia. Why don't you perhaps introduce yourself, and then we can go to Toby, who's in Singapore, and then we finish with Dipti, who's joining from Bangalore, India.
Thanks, Chris. Great seeing you and everyone here. And Steph, happy Thanksgiving, and to everyone who's celebrating today and tomorrow. So I'm Anna. I started my career at Google as head of people in Google Israel. I did a few things across Europe and the US, and then I moved to Sydney and I was leading the people dev team there for a while. I've been in Google in total for about 10 years. Then I left and joined a company called Zip, an Australian global business, as their chief people officer. I was there for 3 years, and I've been doing my own thing for about 2 years now. So that's a little bit about me. I think the misconception around, in my view at least, around fractional work is it has to be in your lane or in your background, which sometimes it is. I actually do end-to-end interventions in businesses that I work with, and I build fractional teams to do that, and more than happy to share on how I go about it a bit later on. So that's a bit about me. Thank you.
Great. Toby.
Hey everyone, my name's Toby Berger. I'm based in Singapore, as Chris said. I was at Google from 2013 to 2018. Spent, I guess, the first half of my time there in LCS, and then the second part in the GTM team on working on Google Analytics and DoubleClick back then. The names have all changed since then. I left in 2018 and wanted to work for smaller companies. I think something a lot of people want to do and provide more impact. I was made redundant from Agencia in March of this year, and that's when I started hearing about the fractional world. And there wasn't a lot happening in Singapore at that time, so I just jumped in with 2 feet and to check it out. And I have a lot of learnings from being a newbie and probably jumping in without talking to enough people, but I'm happy to share those later on.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's go over to Dipti.
Hey, thanks, Chris. So yes, I held 2 positions in Google. One was as the chief of staff for India Tech Site Lead. I was responsible for scaling Google India, Google Tech Site in Bangalore. And the second role, I was as the chief of staff for Android, and then, I quit and I joined another Xoogler startup. I was supporting the founder as the chief of staff, again, scaling their operations and strategic planning and talent and all of that. And that's when I realized in terms of fractional work, working for large organizations like Google, Dell, EY, and all of that in the past. And, you handle multiple teams, and, multiple geographies and all of that. And then when you end up in a startup, you just feel that, hey, there is more to do, especially when the bootstrapping and things like that. And that's when I started thinking that, hey, how do I fully get engaged? How do I, get that intellectual stimulation of, doing different things? And I started exploring. Obviously, I started my consulting firm as well last year, just after I quit Google. And in parallel, when I started doing this, and started working in the startup and, picking up multiple clients. And that's that's when I thought that, it gives me that kind of a complete diverse perspective and different challenges so that I handle multiple clients at the same point of time. So yeah, that's my journey.
Awesome. Thank you for the round of introductions. Well, let's start with defining what fractional work is. Deepti, why don't we start from you first, and how do you define fractional work?
I think what I've realized, I'm going to take a very different approach. Obviously there is, flexibility, adaptability, and when you talk about fractional work, right? And how do you network and get those clients, or within your network, all of that. But when I look at fractional, I think it's also a relationship building with the leader or the business that you're supporting. I mean, in my scenario, I think the recent one that I've just picked up is again from a Xoogler network, is a Xoogler founder kind of a thing, right? So I think that relationship is very important, and where they trust you as their trusted advisor. So I feel the scratch point comes in that when I have to define fractional work is understanding the leader, again, adaptability, flexibility, and also how do you deliver high impact results within, like, it could be a part-time, sometimes it could be a fractional full-time as well. So I think that's where it starts off with, if I have to define in my own words how fractional work is to be looked at.
Great. And Toby and Anna, would you add to it? Would you disagree with anything?
Yeah, I would just like to add that I think, like, the big question usually people ask is like, how is a fractional role different than a consultant? I think that's kind of where people are a little confused. I think the difference is a consultant comes in for a very specific project. And it's not to say that fractional, you don't have a defined scope, but it's less, it's probably, I would define it less project oriented, more around a scope of a role or a function. And I think fractional, I think the tenure for fractional is also a bit longer than usually for a consultant. A consultant might come in for a couple months or 2 or 3 months. Fractional, the terms are typically longer. I think the final piece is you're really embedded in the team. So you typically have like an email address of the company. You've got, sometimes you even have direct reports, which I did. So you're really fully embedded in the team, and it's just not 5 days a week. It's usually 2 or 3 days a week, depending on what's required with the role and what you negotiate.
Great.
The one thing that I would add to all of that is, I think fractional is like the magic sauce where startups or scale-ups that cannot afford a very senior exec at a full-time capacity have access to their skill set through the fractional model. And to add to Toby's point, the confusion between consultant and the fractional expertise that you bring to the table, the consultant comes in and tells you how to do things. The fractional expert comes in and actually does the work for you and teaches the business on how to do the work, whether it's for a short period of time, longer period of time. Like, my view on it is fractional should not exist within the business for over 2 years. You actually need to equip the business with the right skill set and the right capability so they can scale without you. And you can come in and out, but it's really the access to the expertise that you allow that business to have that it will not be able to have at a full-time capacity.
And given 3 of you are very international as well, Anna, can I get your thoughts? Have you found Australian companies be more receptive to fractional executives, some of your international contacts? So can you share with the audience here, based on your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the Australian market, and as we mentioned, I do work globally. The Australian market is the least receptive to this work, and they're kind of traditional in the view of, we want someone here full time to be our like home, embedded executive. There is quite a few challenges kind of building the trust. Just because I'm fractional doesn't mean that I am not part of the business. And also people view it as a temporary solution versus a long-term solution, and kind of really hard for them to kind of get their heads around, 2 years actually not a short period of time in a kind of startup world, I would say. So it's harder in Australian businesses specifically. It's harder to embed yourself within a business, but also to build that trust. I personally work in AU, work only with companies who have the aspirations to scale globally. That's kind of my expertise and what I bring to the table. So I would usually work with businesses who have that global point of view, but I just really don't see companies such as Commonwealth Bank, etc., starting to embed those fractional execs within their systems. It's very much kind of full-time gigs and people with badges running around. I myself have quite a few badges and thoroughly enjoy them. But yeah, people kind of don't really see you as part of the furniture as they should when it comes to the EU market. Way more open-minded, like around Singapore, Hong Kong, US, of course. In the US, I actually heard the saying that fractional is the new black. And that the market will actually shift more and more toward the fractional execs due to that access to the expertise that everyone wants and not everyone can afford.
Deepti, why don't we go to you? Because I know you have your US contacts as well as India. What's your take on what Anna was referring to before in terms of international adoption?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Obviously, I'm based out of Bangalore and being the startup capital for in India. A couple of my clients are US based companies, right? And they are okay to work fractional and remote. And similarly, here I've worked with at least 3 to 4, founders themselves, and they are open with the fractional. And sometimes it's been project based. I mean, I know we've been talking about is it long term, short term, or it's like how do we define between a consultant and fractional work? But yes, they do take from an expertise standpoint is where we come in. So I think there is a shift. I would agree that there is a shift that's people are okay for people senior level leadership just coming in, providing their expertise and then let it be project based or long term as well. So yeah, the market is pivoting towards the fractional work even in India.
Great, great. And Toby, anything to add from your standpoint in Singapore? Sorry, Toby, you're on mute.
No, I agree with everything that's been said. I think for Singapore, there's just the added challenge of talent and visas. Right. So it's tough for a foreigner to do fractional work in Singapore because of the visa requirement so I would say that's the only downside. I would say though that it is becoming quite normal and quite popular here. I think for all the reasons that everyone has said, especially for startups that want to access talent and can't afford it. Singapore's got a pretty vibrant startup community, and a lot want to have the talent but just can't afford it. So the ones that are lucky that are either PRs or have some kind of visa that allows them to stay without being sponsored, definitely have an advantage here.
And Toby, while we're on this topic, can you share more about how folks who may be outside of Singapore should consider coming into Singapore to potentially find fractional work? I see someone from Malaysia, clearly we have a lot of Aussies here, but even all the way from the US and other places. Should people start thinking about being in Singapore for perhaps a few weeks of the year in 2025 to try to find fractional work, or do you really need to be in Singapore for the majority of your time to sell and sort of service the clients?
That's a good question. I think a lot of companies in Singapore, especially if they're startups or have ambitions outside of Singapore, are used to remote work and people working outside the country. It's a very expensive market for talent. So companies are happy to have remote workers. And I mean, Singapore is also a very small market. So, if you're a startup here, your ambitions is not to just stay in Singapore and sell your tech or whatever you're selling in this market. So I think they're quite receptive to it. I think the only question is how well do you know, I'd say, the region around. So I think Malaysia would be a great opportunity if you're living in Malaysia and you want to do fractional work in Singapore. I think that's a natural one. I think Indonesia, Philippines, and Southeast Asia. So I think it's just finding the right companies and understanding like what are their objectives, what are the markets that they want to go into, and I guess depending on your role, that could be important, or maybe it's not. If it's a people role, maybe it's less important. So I think there's lots of opportunities to work with companies in Singapore from the outside.
Great, thank you. So Anna, let me pose this question to you, then I'll go to the other two panelists. What have been the best parts of fractional work, and also the most surprising parts that perhaps are less attractive?
I think the best part of fractional work, at least for me, is the impact you can create in a very short period of time. You could actually transform a business in a very short period of time, if you know what you're doing and you can clearly have the right relationships. And one of the reasons I actually decided after Zip not to go for another full-time gig, because I felt that kind of putting my eggs in one basket kind of limits your impact to only one company versus taking the experience that I have, and spreading the love of the world. That's because you have the opportunity to really have impact, significant impact on multiple businesses as well. The most surprising thing is, I would say you need to be really comfortable with not being home. Like being at Google for 10 years, like it was always my home. Like I would travel over the world and I was a Googler. It's like we're still, some of us, we're now with Xooglers. It's kind of a very core part of your identity. And even at Zip, 3 years, it's not a short period of time. And suddenly you need to kind of be okay with not being a part of only one company and actually owning your own space. Being very, very comfortable with that and knowing the boundaries. That's probably was kind of the most surprising thing is like, for example, last year, like, am I going to the Christmas party? Am I not going to the Christmas party? Like, am I taking my team out, or do I empower the new leader that I've hired to do so? Like all of those kind of small moments and creating and being okay with those boundaries, probably something that I would call out.
And something which I found really amazing was one of the companies that you were doing fractional work for didn't feel that you were a fractional person. And can you share more how you gave that, I guess, the opinion, or did your job so well, they didn't feel that you were a fractional person, that they felt you were embedded in the company?
I think it all goes to something that Deepti mentioned earlier on this call, building the trust with your clients. I think as soon as, and even with employment, as soon as you have that trust, nobody actually like monitors like when are you coming in, where you're not coming in, etc. And due to the fact that I had that trust and relationship within the executive leadership team, really helped. And I would also say, and this is not kind of to discourage work-life balance in any way, shape, or form, but to really being there for them in key moments. And that's what creates a feeling that you're kind of part of the ecosystem. So you're always being to support when something escalates, even if you're on another project. So none of my clients actually are like aware of how many balls I'm juggling and each time, to create that atmosphere like I'm yours, I'm here, I'm present. And also knowing when to lean in and when to lean out. You need to know when you're not required to kind of handhold tightly. You're able to lean in, create the space, and then come in strong whenever you're needed. It's a balance. It's more of an art than a science, I would say. But I really work, and also kind of coming from people's space, to really understanding the needs of a client in a specific moment of time and addressing those needs. So that would say that helps. And you refine those skills and needs, kind of relationships. And what works for one business doesn't necessarily work for another. So for another business, when the scope of role is around a specific project, building those relationships and trust and being there for everyone can actually damage a relationship versus strengthening it. So I'm hoping that kind of answered the question, and more than happy to give a bit more examples and details.
Awesome. And folks, feel free to start thinking of the questions you want to ask as a follow-up at the end of a few more minutes when we open up to the audience. Deep, do you want to share more about what are the best parts of fractional work for you and the most surprising parts?
Yes, I think for me, I mean, I as a person, I get bored very easily. So the fact that I can jump from, one problem or, issue or, one situation or strategy to another, I think that is the best part. That gives me like diversity, flexibility to move from, I'm here in a company with a startup. doing a fractional CEO work, talking about investor relation and all of that. From there, I jump into more of a CMO work and talking about social media and all of that. And then you're, pretty much in another company where, where I'm currently doing and, L&D kind of, program management work for them, and working on their strategy. So you're like dealing with different things. And I think that keeps me like really moving. And I think that's the best part. So anybody who thinks that, hey, I just need that intellect stimulation, I think this is something that you need to look for. The surprising part is when you have to move, again, it's the same. The flip side of that is you have to move and immediately like juggle around and say, hey, here now I'm thinking as a fractional CEO, thinking about investor relation, and then moving there to a social media marketing campaign, and saying, hey, how do I end up getting that engagement up and all of that. I think that is where it's also the good part and the surprising part, because you should be able to adapt at the drop of the ball and say that, hey, you know what, and as Anna mentioned, like you would get client calls, and suddenly just going there as a trusted advisor and being there for them is also important. So the time management and the adaptability, which needs to be at the top of the hour, I think those are the things that I would call out.
Thank you, Deepti. Toby, did anything not get covered from those two responses?
Yeah, I would just think to add, yeah, I think the nice parts are they're covered off already around the flexibility. I think it's really important to clearly firstly define kind of what your role is. I know it sounds obvious, but if you're not crystal clear and have kind of those boundaries talked about and agreed on, I think it cause misalignment. I think the other piece is that I've learned is, if you're in a customer or a prospect facing role, if you're in sales or dealing with customers, I think fractional is just a really tough thing to do. Unless your main role is just to drive the strategy and then you have a team that kind of executes on it. But if you're expected to be meeting with customers or prospects, it's a lot more difficult than I thought it was going to be.
So at that point, how should someone decide whether it is for them, and what are the things they should consider before jumping into a fractional work? And is there something that people can do to start thinking about building that business ahead of time?
Yeah, so in terms of whether it's not for you, yeah, that's a tough one because, unless you try it, you sort of don't know. I think like if you're the type of person that like really identifies with the company you work for, if you really jump in with 2 feet, if you get involved with other elements beyond your job, if you get involved with social elements, or maybe you start adding value to the company, like at Google, there's like a ton of ways to get involved with Google. If you're the type of person to get involved with all these different elements of the business, like it would be tough to do fractional because you would take that and want to do that in these other businesses, and you can't, right? You have to stick to kind of what your core role is, and that's it, and not fall in love, right? And if you relate it to dating and getting married, like you can't fall in love with this person. You can go on a couple of dates with them, but you can't fall in love. So that's something that I'm also learning as I've started on this journey. So that's the first piece. I think what's the second part of that question, Chris? Sorry.
That's the suitable, and how does someone build it? Can someone
build it, yeah,
before they jump into fractional work, or do they really just need to throw it in?
Yeah, no, I think like just start meeting with companies or startups. And the best thing is startups. Startups will talk to anyone that they think they can get some free advice from, and start on like working on some small, well-defined projects. Whether it's coaching, whether you're a senior salesperson like I've done, and you coach some salespeople, or you come in and maybe you help them redefine their pipeline strategy. But work on a small project. And see if you like working on kind of a smaller piece of the business instead of wanting to own the whole thing. So that's maybe one suggestion. I can tell you though that startups like will take, if you call a startup, or a startup calls you and they say, hey, listen, can we meet with you and talk for an hour? Like they'll love the free advice, and you shoot over a few suggestions. Quite often that can lead to, why don't we do a small engagement for a month or two and see how this works out.
I think quite a few Xooglers have approached me, but also maybe they're on the call of doing what you just mentioned, but they don't have the right branding or they have not established themselves as yet. Can you share more about the best practices you've been able to follow in the past few years to really get yourself to the point where startups want to spend 1 hour with you, Toby?
Things. Firstly, you have to be active on LinkedIn. Well, it's funny now when I'm looking to hire people, I look to see what they're posting on LinkedIn, and it's amazing how many salespeople apply for jobs and have never made a post on LinkedIn. And to me, that's kind of like a minimum requirement. I think there's lots of communities out there. There's lots of social events. The Xoogler one is in Singapore. We do an event once a month. Just go to that and network and talk to people. I've also been involved with some angel investments. So there's a natural community for me to go talk to my portfolio companies, and startups all talk to each other. So that quite often you'll be talking to one, they'll say to you, you know what, you should go talk to this other company over here. So there's lots of accelerator programs you can go mentor. They're always looking for people to help out with startups. So there's a ton of ways to get out there. And they're all looking for free help. And once you start doing a bit of advising, show you can give a little bit of value, they'll pay for a lot more.
And it's even easier now with remote work and everyone's trying to expand globally, right? So I think that's the access has really opened up for a lot of people to do those things. So thank you for sharing that. DP, anything to build on from what Toby was saying about how to build a fractional business?
Right. No, plus one to all the points that Toby mentioned, in fact. But what I would add on is also, I think it's super important to identify your strengths, right? What exactly that you want to do, because obviously the 1 hour that you spend with a founder and you pick up a project and that's not your strength, right? You don't want to fail. So I think it's important to say upfront that this is not my cup of tea, and be able to let go of that, even if it's a great project or they're giving you a great money or whatever it is. But I think that it's you need to identify your strength when you get into fractional work and say, hey, these are the things which is doable for me, and this is what I want to. From the trust and the relationship building is where it's important. So again, when the question that how do you go about accessing those information, like I've used Xoogler Slack, probably known you in the past or worked in the past. So I think it's super important to identify what you want to, what your strengths are, and what is that you can get on the table. And because you're working largely with the C-suites, I think it's super important to do that.
Great. And Anna, anything you want to round out for this question?
Yeah, I would say if you were at Google and you loved being a part of this one company and you felt like the comfort and the ease and you love being a part of a steady team, then fractional work is not for you. It's quite flexible and you don't necessarily have a team at all times. And when it comes to building your brand, I think that my advice would be focus on adding value in the meetings that you do have with founders. And even if the project is not for you, you could say, hey, not my cup of tea, and I know someone, most likely from the Xboot community. And the more connections you make, the more value you add. And I think it's like karma, everything comes back around to you. So I'm personally not too fussed about building a brand. Yes, LinkedIn, but creating value in those startup communities, I think that's the most important thing.
Great. Let's open up to audience questions. I'm sure there's a lot of questions people have. I also haven't gone through half my questions I prepared, but let's see whether anyone has questions first before I continue asking some of my questions that I've prepared for today. Feel free to unmute or raise your hand. I can call on you.
Hey, Chris. How does it work for startups and trying to, where possible, minimize the admin overhead? In particular to you, I've been working with quite a lot of different collaborators in India, and just working through those different cultural things. But as you scale out, how do you think about payment when you've got a distributed team and maybe some people in India, you've got a fractional collaborator in Singapore? Do that in an efficient way without getting too many prickly like tax and legal like organizational contracts to manage?
Yes. In fact, I mentioned that I opened a consulting firm, right? So which means that, and it's in India based. So I did, formally have a consulting company which I had opened. Sometimes, know that a long-term engagement, and this is purely something where there's a gig where I'm working on not through projects for them, a very single fractional work, like say it's a role of a fractional COO or CMO, then I take it, I've taken it on my name, right, which just means that it's not on the company's name that I formed, it's on an individual person's name. So I manage between the two, depending on what the scope of work is. Then take a call in terms of, so and just to give you examples, if it's a US based client, I usually try to get on the just a tax that I have to go ahead and pay. But if it's an Indian client, then I juggle between, hey, my individual account versus the corporate. So that's the approach that I've taken between the two.
So just to like underscore that, I'm based in Australia, so I would just and you like a wise thing, and you
usually it's a wire transfer. I mean, if it's anything outside the India, it's been a wire transfer.
Whole deal that can employ fractional or whomever, almost anyone. They do the taxes and payroll for you. So if you're trying to build teams internationally, deal or remote to go for a small fee, they'll be able to take the admin off you, and then you can employ anywhere in the world.
I'll ask you a follow. Thanks, Anna.
No worries.
So Jyoti, you want to unmute and ask your question? Maybe unmute yourself, sorry.
Of my audio and video, but I hope you can hear me. The question was one or two questions, actually, two questions actually. The roles that you played in your previous organization, the fractional assignments that you take up, are there? They're all sort of different fields, right? So I want to know, one, is it, are you tied to a domain, or are you offering consultancy across the board? That's the first question. The second question really was, and I think this will depend on the companies that you're working with, but does this have to be remote? Does this have to be in person? Can it be hybrid? How has it worked? I mean, when you're talking about doing in multiple places, you may have to manage your time. And so does in-person, attendance, is that mandatory? How does it work for you guys?
Deepti, you want to take it first, since you may be in a common market as...
Yeah, sure. Yes. Good question, Jyoti. So what I think, just to give you a background of my career, I've been in corporate communication and marketing and corporate communication all through, out of 23 years, I think about 15 to 16 years I spent there. And after that, I moved to a chief of staff. Right, which is more strategic driven, and you as a chief of staff, you pretty much juggle, any kind of hat, like from legal to tax to talent to pretty much everything. So that gave me a very easy way to move between roles. So that's when I said, hey, it's a COO to a CMO, I'm able to do that. And something got to do with strategy. I think, yeah, it comes in because I've played a chief of staff role for the last 6-7 years. So that is what it makes it easy for me. And I don't stick to a domain, but I do try to stick to a vertical. I can give you examples as well. So I do try to stick to all the tech and the, the internet-based companies, and, because that's what I've spent, like, well, largely in the 23 years, it's largely been IT and large MNCs, right? So I try to stick to that. If there is a variation, again, I call it out to the founder. I was talking to a founder with had to tell them that, hey, this is my first time while I have done, the CSR part and all of that, but, this is something that it's a little different. Founder, but having said that, that's how I end up juggling between these roles. Another point that you mentioned, founders, I traveled to the US, and actually was there in person for their off-site and all of those things, right? So point, telling them that, hey, your availability, they need to call it out in case they're expecting you to be there in person, but largely it can be a hybrid is what I look like. So I put it on a priority list in terms of, hey, where but basically you juggle between and prioritize who needs you more. So I hope I answered your question.
Great. Nepal, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Hey, yeah, thanks. This session has been incredibly helpful. So I had two questions. One was around how do you set boundaries, especially when the work requires you to join last minute meetings? How do you sort of manage that? And the second is, the find jobs would be through LinkedIn and your network, but are there other ways to approach this?
Anna, you want to take it, and maybe Toby can add anything else?
I'm happy to give it a crack. So I have never been in a situation last minute meeting, due to the fact that when you're fractional, at least the way I approach the work, is that you're the driver, you're not the follower. So you're mostly kind of putting the meetings in and then driving the work forward. To be there, then you make yourself available for last minute fires. That would be kind of my call. Let's say on that, how I look at it. So I no longer have an employer, right? So I have partners that I partner with. And in those partnerships are clear, I would say, definitions of roles, responsibilities, etc. Yes, I will always attend a meeting that I'm required at, but that will most likely be driven by myself than by the client. On virtual versus in person, I do most of my work virtually, due to the fact that my clients are in the US as well, and I'm based in Sydney. If a client needs me in person, on-site strategy meetings, etc., that's been discussed ahead of time, and I charge more for those in-person sessions, as it basically takes me away from my other projects. I hope that answered the question.
Toby, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I think this, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about if you're customer or in sales and prospect facing. I think you get into these situations quite a bit, and this is where you need to, probably some learnings that I got is better define what you will and won't do ahead of time. I think like also finding the right partner. Or right company you want to work with. Like usually there's a bit of give and take. So, oh yeah, I can do this last minute meeting today, but then, next week, some of the time that I've allotted to you, I need to reallocate to another piece of business. So I think like finding the right partner where you have that relationship, where you built that trust, is also as important. But that's, it is tough when if you're working with customers or you're in sales and trying to close deals. Like this is where those last minute meetings do come up. So you should think about that ahead of time.
Thank you. Anton, would you like to unmute and ask your question that you had posted?
Sure. My question is basically the following. I've heard a lot about fractional work in like sales, marketing, and a lot of other roles. I'm wondering how common it is to do like fractional work in more technical domains, particularly let's say like CTO like roles, like engineering management, product, something like that. Maybe it's not the right panelists there, but I bet you have experience seeing people in those roles and experience working with them. And if there are any caveats for the technical fractional work, I would love to know that. Thank you.
Maybe I can take that one, Christoph, all right? Oh, did you go? If you wanna.
No, go ahead. I can add on.
So I've definitely seen the requirements for the tech and product folks in the fractional space. More and more companies are actually, especially at the seed and post-seed stage, are trying to hire CTOs and are not capable of doing so. There is more and more demand for CTOs in this space as well. And I've seen quite a few in the product space. Once again, on the smaller side of the house. Anton, I don't know where you're based, but I actually know quite a few fractional CTOs in Sydney that I'm happy to connect with if you want to have a chat with someone kind of in your domain expertise. I have not worked with fractional CTOs thus far, but I'm hoping I'll have an opportunity to do that. So I'll have a bit more experience on how exactly does that work. It's clearly like, you have, things that happen that could, shut down the entire product. And if you're not online, it might be an issue. But it is becoming more and more common. So Dipti, over to you.
Yeah, no, I figured that out myself because the startup that I'm supporting is actually looking for a CTO. So I know that there are CTO positions available, and people are the startups are looking for roles like this which are technical. And just to add on, we have team across the globe, right? We have again fractional people working from Kazakhstan. We have people working from again India who are again remote and doing fractional work for this company, for the startup. So answer to your question, yes, there is potential. There are people looking for it. Yes, there are technical and as Anna mentioned, even the product related, even the fractional product lead or chief product officer or so. There is potential there as well. So I think it's just happy to again connect. So when I was talking to because when we put up the posting for the CTO for this and I was talking to people, I did understand that most of them are doing multiple gigs as well. So which means that yes, there is a market, and I'm happy to connect you as well, as Anna mentioned. But yeah, India and US is something that we are looking at.
Yeah. Anton, I guess I can ask a clarification. Are you thinking about doing fractional work to perhaps test things out to work there full time, or are you trying to think of what's the best way to arrange truly fractional work?
Good question. I don't have a good answer for that one because I'm right now trying to discover basically whether fractional work is for me. I've managed, let's say, two fractional-like positions where I like that was like 5 years ago, and at that time I didn't know the word fractional. It was more consultant on like 20-hour plus 30-hour basis. So right now I'm kind of hearing there are definitely some differences, and I was definitely more of a fractional worker rather than a consultant. So I'm trying to figure out what to do next with my professional aspirations. So maybe depending on the particular work, the fractional can become full-time. For technical, I can imagine that, but I'm not married to any of those ideas yet.
Thank you. Anyone else wants to raise their hand and ask questions? I know Katie has some questions on, maybe we got Naveen, and then after that, Katie, you're going to ask your questions live. That'd be great. Naveen, why don't you go for it?
Yes, thank you. Once again, hello from sunny Mumbai, and happy Thanksgiving to all. I just have a question around accountability. I'm a little confused between the consultancy and the fractional leadership, which I think Anna did mention that it is about, the consultants will say what you have to do, whereas the fractional leadership will actually do it. But how you buy in from the people you're leading in the company? Because if they know that you're only there for a shorter period of time, what is the commitment level from people who are working in that domain, in that field under you?
Maybe Anna, you can expand on what you had shared earlier.
Yes, absolutely. So maybe I could use a live example and kind of from my expertise, and then you could, if I didn't answer your question, feel free to unmute and I'll clarify. So let's say, for example, I come into a business. I usually run assessments, so end-to-end assessments. I have my own way of doing so. Then I present the outcomes of the assessment to the CEO, and we agree on what I'm going to do and what I'm not going to do, right? And let's say, for example, I've looked into the people space and they don't have a scalable hiring policies or processes, etc. A consultant would go, here's how it should look like. Give me my money and I'm leaving. Versus, here's how it should look like. It will take me 3 months to embed it and another 3 months to build the capability to scale it. And then I say, and with the internal team or a team that I hire, I then fix the problem. By the time I leave the business, they have the right hiring practices to scale globally. That would be an example. So instead of from a consultancy point of view, and there are plenty of consultants in the people space, they would say, well, here's your problem. This is how the solution should look like, but they will not help you to actually embed that in practice. Now, on the buy-in, it's actually a great question. And my answer for that is that it's not my fractional project. It's the CEO who brought me in to fix the gaps within the business. So the CEO is there to get the buy-in from the internal teams to partner with me in the right way to fix the gaps. It's not for you necessarily to chase the buy-in, prove your worth, and kind of, I would say, explain to the business what needs to be done. You then agree with your main client, which is usually the CEO in this case, because we do kind of come in at the XLT level where we understand what the gaps are, we understand what we need to close them, and we have agreed to put effort, budgets, time into closing those gaps. And thus you don't really need to kind of chase the buy-in. Is it challenging? Yes, it is. Is it a smooth ride? It's never a smooth ride. But that would be kind of my answer to the question. If you come in actually as a consultant, many times I would say the recommendation that you put on the table would be rejected by the business. Oh, we can't do it because we don't have the resources, because we don't have the budgets, versus you're there to actually embed into the work. And from like a technical product perspective, you actually run the tech teams as a fractional CTO. You're not a consultant that comes in and shows you kind of the gaps within the code. You actually go and solve the problem. So I hope that answered your question. If I didn't, just let me know. I'm more than happy to clarify.
Great.
No, you on the challenges part for sure. I don't want to add too many questions to my already asked question, but I would still probably have a little doubt on the sustainability after the fractional leadership has left. How the people continue with the course direction that has been set for the company. Is there a commitment level from the CEO at that time that things will be as it has been set, or they're going to change during the course of time? So I'll leave that food of thought, perhaps as a question or as something to ponder later on. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Naveen. Let's go to Katie, then go to Nikhil and Adnan. Katie?
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for setting this up. I was just curious if you could talk more on the compensation piece of how you've set up fractional work. I've done a bit of consulting where I've set up hourly or project-based or milestone-based and then negotiated equity, but I'm just curious for fractional work, how you've kind of gone about that. Thank you.
I can take that, and then probably Anna and Toby can add. So it's all three of them, Katie. It could be hourly, based. It's project based sometimes. It's some few times, and the recent ones that I've picked up is equity based. So you I mean, after you have the first conversation with the founder or the person that you're planning to work with or the company that you're planning to work with, take a step back, look at it, what works for you. What's the need of the hour? If it's something that you need the money upfront, obviously the hourly works better. If it's project based or outcome based, then you plan it very differently with different kinds of payment in terms of, hey, initially when we start off, this is the kind of portion or this is the ratio that we want to have in the kitty, and there have been some advances and all of that. Or sometimes it's equity. I mean, if you know that the startup or the product has the potential and you can bet on it, equity also works. So I think it's a personal choice, but yeah, all of these three things is I've used. I mean, I've pretty much made use of for all of these modes of payments.
We're gonna run out of time, but Toby, anything quickly you want to add there?
No, I think that's exactly it. Especially if you're working with startups, like everything's on the table.
Great. Nahil, why don't I ask you a question, then with Adnan?
For sure. Thanks everyone for your time. I was just curious, how would you say? So I do like UX design, and I was curious, how would you say you would approach a startup that's outside of your network? Immediately, how would you do that?
I can take that. I think I'm a sales guy, so we're approaching companies kind of cold for the first time all the time. I think if there's a startup you're really interested in, go to their site or look at their product or talk to people who are using their product and figure out how you can add value, and ping the founder and say, listen, I've either tried your product or I've talked to these people. They've said this. Here are 3 ways that I think I can help you. Super easy. I don't think you need to. It's not rocket science, right? It's if you can show you've done a little bit of research and exactly that you have the skills or the experience that can solve a problem that they might not even know they have that you've identified. Any founder will talk to you.
And you can find someone in this community who knows someone in that startup, most likely. There are 25,000 Xooglers here. So whether this community or any other community within your network, you will be able to find someone who knows of them or can connect you, and that always helps.
Yeah, and I think adding on to Toby, I think sometimes I've gone outside the startup, right? Like in India, because of the low cost, a lot of GCCs are set up here, global capability centers. I know it's not answering your question, Neil, as a UX person, but I'm just saying for others on the call. So if you know that, hey, a company is setting up their India operations here, it's always good to just, again, reach out to the community or reach out to, the HR person on LinkedIn, Google them and say that, hey, I'm keen, I've built global capability centers for blah, 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 or, I understand this function very good. I can understand the legal tax or whichever domain or vertical that you belong to. And have that conversation. So I think also to keep yourself updated about what's happening. Again, that's what I said. You have to reflect within and say that, hey, what is that you want to get on the table? And that's where you need to stick on. So if it's a startup, if it's a large company, MNC, you can still add value. It's about what is that you want to basically show yourself as from a personal branding standpoint. What is that you want to be known for? So I think that's super important.
Great. So Deepti, I want to ask you to help us wrap up, then Toby, then to Anna. But what else would you like to share before we wrap up today's session about your experience being a fractional executive, and what can the audience learn from you?
I think we didn't speak about it.
What would you like the Xoogler community to assist you in your career in moving forward? Any collaborators or perhaps people you want to work with?
Yes. So the first thing I think we didn't talk about it, that how long does it take to actually get a gig, right? So I think be at it. That's one thing that I want people to know. When I started off, it was blank, and at one point I accepted everything that came my way, right? I have done events too. I have done all kinds of things. So I think it's super important for you to take a step back, and I know it will take time. And please understand that what is that you want to get on table, because it's end of the day, it's your brand, right? Because eventually people will talk to each other and I say that, hey, this person worked with you, this founder, and then you're talking to the C-suite all completely, right? So it's important that you take a step back, see what your strengths are, and then go and play. And I think what I'm looking from this community, I think it's one of, and thanks to Chris to build this up. I think it's one of the most used, I would say, community of all sorts that I've done. Most of my gigs have come from here. The contacts that I make is pretty much like I put up on Google Slack or, the Google India WhatsApp group and all of that. So I think that, yeah, collaboration, now that I know, like what Anna does, what who does, and I'm just saying that, hey, if there's anything that I can help them, and in a similar way I can pull them as well. So I think that's the collaboration that I asked for. Yeah, thanks.
Awesome, thank you. Toby.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the biggest lesson that I've taken is just around, really knowing what you want to do, being very clear, and defining and setting those boundaries. It's going from working full time and working 9 to 5 or working for one company and and then going to a new space where you could have multiple customers or clients or partners, whatever you want to call them. It's much more difficult to manage that. So just be clear, find the right partners to work with, and just to tackle what Deepti said, like don't say yes to everything. Just like in any role, like when you have to prioritize the work that you do, you have to know what to say yes to. And at Google, I think that's one of the things that everyone learns there is like the most important thing is like what do you say no to. So yeah, I think that those are my biggest takeaways from this very short journey so far. Yeah, in terms of what the community can give to me, I mean, I always ask very tactical questions on the WhatsApp chat. I'm quite busy right now, but yeah, if I can help out anyone in this community, I'm happy to either give advice or work on projects. My specialty is GTM. So I do sales, marketing, partnerships. So happy to work with anyone part of the community.
Thanks, Toby. And Anna, perhaps round it out for us.
Thanks, Chris. I'll finish strong. This is one of my favorite communities. I love being part of it, love giving back to it, and love connecting with people on it. So feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn or any follow-up questions, feel free. And once again, thanks for having us, Chris. And happy Thanksgiving to all the Americans that will be watching the recording.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for the time, Anna, Toby, as well as Deepti. You've been such strong communicators today, but also valued Xoogler members. I'm sure everyone would reach out to you on LinkedIn, emails, and everything. And thank you, everyone, for joining live and also watching this recording. We will do more with the fractional work piece. We know how important it is for people to have more flexibility now, and people are choosing to do more fractional work. And sometimes it's also they want to explore it versus doing a full-time job. So give us feedback. Let me know how this Xoogler community can be helpful to you. Email is just chris@xoogler.co. And thanks for being part of this community. See everyone soon.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.